Greetings and salutations, boys and girls. I hope this video finds you doing well wherever you are in the world. We have an action-packed episode today. I hope you can stick around for the whole thing. First, we're going to talk about some controversy in the Linux world this week from our friends at Canonical. And then we are going to do a quick follow-up on a couple of videos that I've posted recently just to let you guys know how things shook out with those. And then I have a short Q&A session planned where I am going to expound on some of your comments I have found on YouTube videos since the first of the year. And at the end, I've got some housekeeping and a couple of announcements. So I certainly do hope that you're ready for all the fun. Pause now, grab yourself a beverage, and let's go. The big news this week in Linux, and by the way, I'm recording this February the 26th, 2023, is that Ubuntu, Canonical is the company that distributes Ubuntu, or so Canonical has announced, that official Ubuntu flavors will no longer be allowed to ship with Flatpaks up and running. Which means that you, the user, if you're going to be using any of those official flavors of Ubuntu, will have to activate Flatpak support for yourself if you want to use it. That announcement raised some eyebrows in the Linux world, so now Ubuntu founder Mark Shuttleworth has stepped up in a Q&A here. This is on the OMG Ubuntu website. I will put a link to the article, and that's what we're looking at right now. And he is defending the reasons why Ubuntu will not ship with Flatpak. Just to make this perfectly clear, this does not affect unofficial distributions based on Ubuntu, like Linux Mint or Elementary OS or Pop OS. These are not official distributions of Canonical. Kubuntu, Ubuntu Mate, Xubuntu or Xubuntu, whatever you want to call that. That's Ubuntu with the XFCE desktop. That is an official flavor of Ubuntu, so therefore the Flatpak support will not be turned on. So it doesn't affect Linux Mint. Linux Mint likes Flatpaks. They don't like snaps. As a matter of fact, they have gone to great lengths to make sure that no snap support is shipped by default in Linux Mint. So if you want that, you have to go look up how to turn it on. The original idea behind snap packages and Flatpaks and app images is to have a universal installation format for Linux. In years past, each distribution has shipped with a package manager that interacts with their own repositories, and that's where you get your software. And if you have a certain kind of file, you can download that and install it. But each distribution is different. Even though Debian, for instance, uses deb packages and Ubuntu uses deb packages, that doesn't mean they're cross-compatible. And RPM-based types of Linux, like Red Hat Linux, anything on that end of the spectrum, you have RPM packages. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have an RPM, it works on every RPM Linux. So Snap was Canonical's answer to that. And the Snap system works by having a central server that everybody must go through if they would like to have their Snap available. Think Apple Store here. Think some sort of walled garden. Canonical defends this by saying that it's more secure because then they can look at everything that goes in there. The other thing about snaps that kind of bugs people is that the back-end infrastructure of how Snap works, the Snap Store or Snapcraft or whatever that's properly known as, is not open source. It's not really proprietary either. It's just that they never have bothered to open source all the code. And their defense for that is that they did that with Launchpad, which is what PPAs come from, and nobody seemed to care. So the Snap system itself has some good and bad points. Number one, it's very easy to use. It updates itself, so you always get the latest software without having to do updates manually of any kind. Some people see that as a downside. I actually see that as an upside. That way I don't have to worry about it as long as there's not major feature changes. See, we get off into the weeds there. I generally think it's a good thing, though. The problem that I see with snaps mostly is just how slow things launch. Snaps are great for tiny little programs, itty-bitty little Python scripts, or anything that you're not worried about the computer having to load up a great deal of code. But since everything is saved as squash fs and creates a little file system sandbox when you start it up, actually when you install it, it automatically goes into this little sandboxed looped file system, and it's saved to squash fs. Every time the system goes to read that snap, it needs to unpack it, just like you're unpacking a tar.gz file or a zip file. That takes time. So if you have a browser, for instance, that is stored in a snap pack, then what happens is that when you open that for the first time, it tends to take a while to load. That's been the major issue with it that I can see from working with it on a daily basis sort of thing. One of the things that Canonical and Mark Shuttleworth in this article defends is the fact that Snap comes from a central place, and so therefore they feel that that makes it more secure. Whereas a Flatpak, which is just a way of installing Linux on your system, software, that is, not Linux, the operating system, but Linux software, that is decentralized, which to Canonical's point of view makes it less secure, because then anybody can put anything in a Flatpak and put it up online and put a link to it, and then you'll click on it, and oh boy, now I've just installed myself a nifty little virus. That's true. So there's a lot that goes into this. I can see it from both points of view. I don't have super strong feelings about it either way. The computer that I'm recording this video on has not a single snap on it. I haven't really found in my day-to-day working with Linux that there's stuff in Snap that I absolutely have to have. So even on my Ubuntu installs, even though they do come with some snaps installed part of the desktop, I don't generally mess with it. I just let it ride, and it seems to work okay. But there have been occasions in the past when being able to install something from Snap has saved my butt, because then I didn't have to configure anything any further. In other words, I was working on somebody else's machine, and they said, well, I need this piece of software, and then I found the Snap and installed it, and I said, there you go, it works for as long as you're going to need it. And I wasn't really worried about performance or anything in those sorts of situations. So, yeah, I can see. I personally have never messed around with Flatpaks. Never installed a Flatpak, so never had a need to do that. So I can't really say anything negative about them, although I do tend to agree somewhat that being a decentralized service, that it would be a little less secure. I haven't really answered a question about which one I like the best, have I? Because I really, like I said, I don't have strong feelings about it. However, this comes on the heels of a lot of grumbling around Ubuntu for things that they are doing, where they are offering a pro level now where you will get updates to the Universe repo, which traditionally you have not gotten in the past unless people who contributed to Universe did updates, and you have to pay for that. So they're advertising that when you run updates on Ubuntu these days. Another thing that they're doing is they've started to do updates in waves, just standard security updates. And that would be seen by some users as beta testing with your user base, which is exactly what they're doing. And a lot of people kind of scratch their head and kind of look at the way Canonical is managing Ubuntu and forcing their agenda on the user as being not very Linux-like. What is your thoughts? I personally, for now, just stay away from it because I don't need to worry about it. I use Ubuntu. I don't absolutely have to have Ubuntu. There are alternatives, but I like Ubuntu because, like it or not, it's the king of the Linux world. And if it's going to run on Linux, it's going to run on Ubuntu. There's going to be support for it. There's going to be a way to go figure out how to fix it. Okay? If I have a problem with Bluetooth in Ubuntu, I can find a fix quickly. If I have a problem with Bluetooth in Linux Mint Debian Edition 5, I'm up a creek without a paddle, because I couldn't find any information about that recently. And that's one of the reasons that makes me stick with Ubuntu, because I know that there's a lot of people that use it. There's a lot of people that post how to make things work in Ubuntu, and a lot of people who write software for Linux target Ubuntu because it has a huge user base. Because not only are we talking about Ubuntu proper and the Ubuntu flavors, we're talking about Linux Mint, we're talking about Pop! OS, we're talking about a whole lot of Linux out there is based on Ubuntu. And so that's what keeps me coming back to Ubuntu. However, Canonical, I'm not really sure lately. I think maybe that they've kind of lost touch with their community, boys and girls. That's my feeling. I think that a lot of the folks there who were very interactive with the community that I talked to through the years and learned a great deal from, they have moved on. And I'm not feeling the love for the community from Ubuntu like I used to. So that's all I got to say about that. I'd love to see your comments. Let's talk about some follow-ups to the last 3 videos that I have posted here, because I got a whole bunch of comments, and I want to thank you for that right up front. I really do. It has been wonderful coming back to YouTube on a more regular basis. I decided at the first of the year that I was going to start posting more content again here. And one of the reasons that kept me from posting content, among other things, was I didn't feel like there was all that much interaction or appreciation from the audience. Well, you guys have really stepped up, and you have had a lot of very cool, constructive comments, informative. Everybody's playing nice. Thank you. It's just so cool, and a lot of really supportive things have been put in the comment section that are aimed at me. Thank you very much. I read everything. I don't necessarily respond to everything. I kind of look for the question marks, okay? And we're going to do a Q&A here in just a little bit where I get into some of the comments that you've posted since the first of the year. So, a quick look at LMDE, that's Linux Mint Debian Edition 5, was me experimenting with that on a laptop that gave me heartburn on Ubuntu 2204. So the first 2 videos you see here are related. I was really super impressed by how easy it was to install Linux Mint Debian Edition 5. I was super duper impressed with being able to find all the software I needed and getting everything set up, and how easy it was to work with. And once I got it set up, it seemed to run beautifully. I ended up having to roll back to Ubuntu 2204 in short order, though. And the reason why is because I have already mentioned I ran into a major problem with Bluetooth. I couldn't get it to work at all. And I tried some tips and tricks, and nothing worked. I troubleshot it for about an hour, and then I threw up my hands and said, that's enough. I could not find any information on how to caress this thing just the right way to get it to do high fidelity audio, or to pair with the devices that I needed to pair with. And Bluetooth in Linux, I almost said Ubuntu, but all Linux, that's a bit of a mystery anyway. It's a mystery in Windows as well. And it's kind of like Wi-Fi. It's one of those things that when it works, it's great. When it doesn't, it sucks. And I just couldn't find any information about it. So I said, okay, never mind. I will roll back. So, yes, very nice distribution. If it works for you and you find yourself in a situation where you don't have any issues having to need Bluetooth or Wi-Fi drivers, I think you're good to go. As a matter of fact, I'm considering making this my main OS on the machine that I'm recording this video on. Right now, the machine that I'm using has Ubuntu 20.04 on it. But the big issue there is NVIDIA drivers, as I had mentioned in this video, and I really have to just test and see whether I can get away with using the later Nouveau drivers or not. And I've not been able to. The performance just is not there, especially when watching high-resolution video. And I use my computer to watch a lot of video. So I really don't want to watch 60 frame per second video that's jerking all over the place or is screen tearing or whatever, because that's what I get. So that's the only thing holding me back from saying, hey, I don't need the Ubuntu-based Linux Mint. I can use the Debian base. But that's a problem across the board with anybody who's got old NVIDIA drivers now. Like if you have an old NVIDIA card that's looking for 340 or 390, forget it. I don't even know. They just cut it off, and after 2020, they're not including it in the kernel anymore, which to me doesn't make a whole great deal of sense. Why can't you just leave those in there for a little while until I can, work my way out of this, instead of just saying, okay, we're not supporting that anymore, gone. I realize they're not going to get any updates, but if nobody attacks it, why not just leave it in? It's my own 2 cents. Your feedback is more than welcome. All right, about Ubuntu 22.04 really being an LTS, that is still a bit of a problem on the machine that prompted me to try out LMDE 5 on a lot of your suggestions. I reinstalled Ubuntu because I had to, and when I did the updates, it moved me up to the hardware enablement kernel without asking, so I rolled it back. And then even with rolling it back and installing the hack that I put in there to stay on the LTS kernel, I could not automatically build the Broadcom driver. It wouldn't do it in additional drivers in the software and updates application. So what I ended up doing was just directly installing the package. And for whatever reason, that worked just fine. Now, I don't know whether the DKMS worked or not, but I do know that I got a kernel module and it was able to boot up and I have access. So I'm going to watch this very carefully. And no, I do not plan to try and go to the HWE hardware enablement kernel to see whether that works. I'm going to let it roll, and hopefully this is something that they're going to straighten out, because I was able to find some documentation that this is a known bug and that that's something they're going to work on. It's not like they've dumped the driver from the kernel or anything like that. Broadcom still supports that driver. That's not an issue. It's just that DKMS is not automatically building the modules when you upgrade to kernel. So that seems to be the problem. So for right now, that machine is back to where it was and working the way it should. And the last video I wanted to comment on here was how to format USB drives in Linux, which was a video that I had been thinking about doing because people ask me about this all the time. How do you do this? Or I've tried to put ext4 on my drive and now I can't access it. I don't have permissions. I don't understand. Well, I thought I must have covered this in the last 10 years. I've had to have put this up on the channel. I went and looked, it wasn't there. So that's why I decided to go ahead and record that video and show people 3 different ways. And some people have asked, why didn't you show the Linux Mint tool that does that, which is actually a very cool little tool that comes with Linux Mint. It's a USB drive formatter. It's very simple and it's easy to use. And the reason why is because not everybody that's watching this uses Linux Mint. There's also one that comes with the XFCE desktop, I believe. They have a tool like that as well that simplifies the process. I wanted to show 3 different universal ways of doing that with 3 different kinds of software. And I certainly do appreciate all the views. I had a lot of views on that video and all the great comments, people saying, hey, this is what I do. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is just get a conversation going, man. You got to remember that YouTube is social media, and it really doesn't work without you. If you don't comment on these videos, then it's kind of like broadcasting to the void, and it's like, who cares for me? Because That's the only reason I do this, is to hear what you have to say and to learn from what you have to say as well. And I want to talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer session, which is next. Let me jump over here. I have my questions all lined up. And this is stuff that you have posted on videos that I have posted since the first of the year. There are no audio related questions here. They are all Linux related. What I'm thinking about doing at some point is doing an all audio Q&A session. So if you'd like to see that, for those of you who watch both the Linux and audio videos on this channel, please let me know in the comments for this video. So this is a comment from Mariz26. And I get this a lot. I hear this a lot. And I want to choose my words very carefully as I respond to this. I have already responded to him in the comment section, but I have more to say. So let's read his comment for those of you who are on low-resolution devices. I have noticed that you installed Google Chrome. It's kind of funny how we talking about evil Microsoft, and yet we install software that spy on us and do more evil things than Microsoft does. 2 quotation marks. Google saves the data, and every time you search, it knows your searches. Or I see DT, I'm assuming that he is, or she, excuse me. To assume that that's a he is wrong. But I am assuming here that he is referring to DistroTube here on YouTube. Or I see DT making a video software that is closed, sourced is garbage, and yet he uses YouTube instead of other platforms. Okay. You have to be very careful when you post comments like this, because this could be construed that you are judging somebody for their choices. And when you do that, you automatically put them on the defensive. I actually don't see it this way. However, I did answer the question about Google Chrome, and I will answer that now. I use Google Chrome. I use it exclusively. I do not use any other browsers on my machines. I have been using Google Chrome since before it was in beta. We're talking about a long, long time ago. I find Google Chrome to be the most compatible and most reliable browser that you can install on any operating system anywhere. It is cross-platform. You can sync between platforms very easily using the sync service that Google has. If you use two-factor authentication with Google, it is extremely secure. Yes, it's absolutely true that everything that you type into Google Chrome and you search for on Google, they are looking at what you search. It's 100% true. In my case, I really don't care. And it's because since I do post on YouTube, and YouTube pays me for royalties, in some certain sense, I am working for Google. Therefore, they have all of my tax information, boys and girls. They know everything about me. All right? So what I type into Google Chrome probably won't shock them. And most of the data that they collect is very... number one, it's innocent in that it is anonymous. It would be hard when you're looking at a database filled with 10,000 people searched to figure out which one of those people is me or you. And so therefore, I'm kind of okay with that. Although I do think that every major company out there, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, anybody who is playing in an internet or computer space steps way over the line. Microsoft is egregious about it. And the thing that really bothers me about Apple and Microsoft is the fact that they make you pay for the privilege, okay, of them taking all of your information from you. and doing God knows what with it. Google is a free service, mostly. And you can sign up and use their stuff. And as long as you know going in that you are the product, because that's how this works, there's nothing free on the internet. Somebody's making money off of it in some way, somewhere. Then that's okay. And I use a lot of Google services in the background, and I use the Sync service, and I use Google Chrome, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. As far as DistroTube making a video about software that's closed source being garbage and then turning around and doing a YouTube video instead of other platforms, that's sort of apples and oranges right there. It really is, because there are open source platforms out there, that's true. And if you want to, as a creator that puts media out there, make a statement, you could stand up and you could say, well, I'm not going to use YouTube anymore because it's Google, because it's censored, because blah, whatever reasons you come up with that you don't want to be on YouTube. You could make a big fuss about it, and you could say, I'm going to this new open source platform, and I'm going to stop posting over here, and you guys have to follow me. Well, I have 124,000 subscribers on this channel. 125 by now, I would guess. As of when I'm recording it, that's about what it is. And if I did that, about 2,000 people might follow me. And that would be it. Because you have people who watch casually, they lurk, and they don't give a crap about any of this stuff. And what that does to a creator is, all of a sudden, you have just reduced your audience to the smallest, lowest common denominator, people that really like what you're doing. And there are people who have posted on YouTube and still continue to post on YouTube who do not interact with the platform for those very reasons, and they have created this little niche audience that they talk to. And if you are somebody who's been in the Linux community for a while, you'll know who I'm talking about. And they don't really care about bringing anybody new into the fold. They have found their little corner of the world, and they have their Patreon page, and they sell their advertisements, and apparently it works for them. That's fine. I am on YouTube because I've been here for 15 years. I was doing YouTube videos before I even really got into Linux. Now that I am into Linux, I'm happy that I have the established YouTube channel, because people find out about Linux all the time by watching my videos here on YouTube. But if I put them somewhere else that was acceptably open source, I'm not going to get any new people. You know why? Because that's not where they are. And if you want to get people's attention, you have to be where people are. For a very long time, I ran a page on Facebook. And I caught a lot of flack for that. Why do you have a Facebook page about Linux? Facebook is evil. Well, it is. I agree with you. However, if you're trying to reach people, and if you don't mind the religious metaphor here, that you're trying to evangelize about Linux, you're trying to bring new people into the fold, then you're going to have to go where they are. Going to some place that's already open source, acceptable, and wonderful, nobody's going to care. So that's kind of the way I feel about it. And if DistroTube wants to post on YouTube, he can go right ahead. I got no problem with it. Everybody who posts here on YouTube and says something about Linux helps to raise awareness about the existence of Linux, and that will bring them in so they understand the difference between open source and closed source software. Finally, on this subject, I want to say I'm a pragmatist. I have to use the tool that's going to work the best right now. Sometimes that's open source. If there are two tools and one of them is open source and one of them is closed source, or proprietary, I will use the open source as long as it's going to do just as good of a job. There's not a lot of open source browsers out there that I think are as good as Google Chrome. That includes Firefox. That includes Vivaldi and Brave and Chromium and all the other stuff. Google Chrome is the most compatible, most reliable browser there is. And that's because Google, whether you like it or not, boys and girls, is the internet. And they set the standards. So therefore, their product is going to work the best. I'd like to see that change, and I'm sure you would too. But for now, that's what I'm going to use. I actually have a Windows machine sitting next to my Linux machine too. And I use it every day. It's not mine. It came from the company I work for. It's a Windows shop. I have to use Windows. I have to use Microsoft Mail. I have to use all that stuff. I keep it away from my Linux systems. And if I have to transfer files back and forth, I do it in some way where they don't have to be on the network at the same time. And that's just the compromise that you have to make to participate in the world that we live in. And, where you can use open source and where you can point out that it's a better deal, go right ahead. But if you're in a situation where you need to do A, B, and C, you have to use tool XYZ to get that done. So let's move on to the next question. I'm sure I'll get a lot of comments on that last one. This is from Not Applicable. I like your handle there. It says, "Hey all, I am looking to get back into Linux. I have used MX Linux XFCE and really liked it. Very efficient RAM use. My question though, is it possible to dress up Mint with the XFCE desktop? Possibly. Well, of course, you can go and download Linux Mint XFCE Edition. And that will be based on Ubuntu. Right now, they do not have a Linux Mint Debian edition based on XFCE. But I would imagine that with a little bit of research and poking around, that you could actually install the XFCE desktop on Linux Mint Debian. If anybody out there knows how to make that happen, that would be interesting to hear about. People who ask questions like this, they really need good answers from people, and that is that you can have any desktop you want on pretty much any base you want. So do some research when you start doing this. It's the main reason I pointed this out, got this question out, was just to simply say yes. Yes with buttons on. You can have anything you want in Linux. Just look a little deeper. So you guys out there who have any kind of media outlet, whether that be a blog page or you're on forums or whatever, when you see these kind of questions, make sure that you answer them. So I wanted to do that myself and just point that out. Yes, you can have it any way you like it. All right, this is a question from Our Kid 2000. I really don't get it. Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, right? And Ubuntu is Debian-based distribution. So how can Linux Mint have a Debian edition? Isn't it already Debian-based? Good grief, that's confusing. Well, think of it this way. You have Mother Debian, and Mother Debian begat Ubuntu. And then Linux Mint came along and looked at Ubuntu and said, if we added a little bit more to that, then we could really make this thing slick. And they did. Now, let's go back and do a little history about Linux Mint so you guys understand. The original mission of Linux Mint was to make Ubuntu easier to use by providing a system that was already ready to go as soon as you installed it. See, Ubuntu used to be, when you got it, that in order to make a YouTube video play, you'd have to install Flash Player. It's ancient history now, but that was a big deal. And if you wanted to play an MP3 file, you would have to go and install codecs manually. And for new Linux users, that was really difficult. I mean, just trying to understand how to install software in Ubuntu when you first downloaded it in 2006, that was difficult enough. And now that you're telling me I've got to go find and configure all of these different quote-unquote proprietary things to make my computer do what it has been doing easily on a proprietary operating system like Windows or Mac. So the idea behind Linux Mint simply was, if we take and just go ahead and ship with those codecs installed, then as soon as people boot up, they'll be able to use the system. So that it was a matter of crossing a lot of I's and dotting a lot of T's. It's still the same way. Now, Linux Mint is compatible with all the software that will run on Ubuntu. And they share the same main repositories for software. And that makes them cross-compatible. But over the years, Linux Mint is less based on Ubuntu than it is developed alongside it. And like, for instance, Linux Mint has a completely different desktop, and it has a completely different video compositor. I'm trying to think, what is it? A window manager. I'm trying to think of. It's really different than it used to be, and so it has kind of become its own thing. It's just that it's software compatible. Ubuntu itself is based on Debian testing. All right, so they take the packages from Debian testing and a lot of times don't do a lot of changes to them, roll them over into their own repos. So what we call Ubuntu is actually just kind of like the shell that goes around this big repository of software. And then if you go to Linux Mint that's based on Ubuntu, then that's sort of we take the Ubuntu shell off of it and we put Linux Mint on it. Hope this is making sense. Now, talking about Linux Mint having their own Debian edition. Well, what they do is, to do that, is simply do not use the Ubuntu repositories, do not use the Ubuntu underpinnings of the operating system, and they use Debian itself, like MX Linux does, for instance. That is a Debian-based distribution, as Ubuntu is. And so when you are working with Linux Mint Debian Edition, you are working with Debian directly, except for the desktop and the window manager and everything put on top of it, okay? However, you're going to see a big difference in how they act about certain things, because a lot of Ubuntu's advantage is the fact that they do a lot of work around things like installing drivers and being able to do that graphically. And the hardware enablement kernel stacks, which has actually been giving me a little heartburn lately, but it's still a good idea where you don't have that in Debian. Debian traditionally is not super user-friendly out of the box. There's a lot of trying to figure out how to get certain things installed, and Ubuntu has tried over the years to make that a little easier and add packages to the repository. So when Linux Mint goes back to Debian, they try and do that as well. They try and automatically install the drivers and enable the non-free repositories where you're going to be able to get those sorts of things without you having to worry about it. And so therefore it's just a different approach to doing exactly the same thing that Ubuntu does. And yes, it is confusing, but I hope that kind of clears things up a little bit. These days, I honestly think that Linux Mint should seriously considering dumping the Ubuntu edition, because philosophically there's such different distributions of Linux that it would probably be easier to do directly off of Debian, but that's for another video at another time. If you would really like to know why Ubuntu exists and Linux Mint based on Debian, I would suggest that you give Debian a spin yourself. You can go download it and install it and see how you do with it. I have usually found my experience trying to use Debian on its own as being one that makes me thankful that Ubuntu and Linux Mint do exist. Next question here. I like Linux a lot, and by the way, this is from Star Lifter C141. They say, I like Linux a lot, and I especially enjoy Linux Mint Cinnamon and LMDE. But I have to ask, how hard would it be to make the terminal safer by simply asking if you we're sure you want to delete something, and if it is deleted, to place it in a deleted folder. Well, that's a good question. The terminal does not do that by default for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is assumed that if you are working at a terminal, that you understand that you need to make sure that you're doing what you want to do before you hit enter. That's just part of the way Linux and Unix work at a terminal. The other thing is that you have to keep in mind that things that you type in at a terminal expecting a result can also be used in scripts. And a script is just taking a whole bunch of commands and putting them together. So if you had a command, for instance, like you needed to remove a file in a script, it's very often that in scripts that you will create a file for some reason and then you'll want to get rid of it. Usually those are like flag files. If you had it set where every time that you run the rm command, the system will then, ask you, that's going to mess up a script. So therefore, most of the commands that you issue at a terminal are not necessarily going to be interactive. If you want to make RM interactive, and if you're just totally not sure of yourself, then what you can do is use RM and then use -I or -I, and that will put it in an interactive mode. You can even create an alias that will put it in an interactive mode, which will prompt you for each file that you want to remove. Most people don't do this. And they don't create aliases because then, once again, it would affect the running of a script. And that's why it doesn't work that way. If you are unsure of what you're doing, especially if you're using things like globs, like you use the star to represent big chunks of files or a whole group of files, then try doing it either graphically if you can, or you can run it in interactive mode and it will ask you if you really want to do this. But to tell you the truth, if you don't quite know what you're doing to start with, then even it asking you won't prevent you from deleting all of that data. Now, as far as it putting it in a recycle bin type situation, that's another story. And that could be easily set up on a Linux system, and I'm not sure why that's not an option, that you could hold things that were deleted for some period of time and then they would roll out. That's one of the things I like about the recycle bin on Windows, actually, is if I throw something in there, I can set a period of time and I can say, okay, after 30 days, I want to get rid of this. That's not necessarily common in Linux. Not that it's not there, but it usually requires some setup to make that happen beyond just right-clicking and doing some quick configuration. So I don't see why we couldn't do that, but when you're running a script, especially when you're running in the system itself and you're not in your own home directory, the RM commands are non-interactive so that they will run straight through without stopping the script. And that's the main reason. This next one comes from Hazy J28. What is the purpose of a shebang and why is it necessary when scripting? It does two things. First of all, the shebang, which by the way usually is expressed with a bash script as what they call a hashtag now, or pound, and then an exclamation point, and then you have /bin/bash, which would be the mythical location of the bash interpreter. Well, that same shebang works with Python scripts and Rust and Ruby and Perl and other things as well. So the exclamation point next to the pound sign there, that tells the system immediately this is executable and it's a script. Because you could set any file to be executable. I mean, you could set a picture to be executable and try and run it. The system will try it, but it'll fail. So you need to have some way to let the system know that, yes, this is executable code. And then telling it where the interpreter is to look for, that's important as well. It says, okay, everything after this line is written in this language, so go and open up a shell for this particular command line interpreter, and then run the script in it. So that's what the shebang does exactly. Now, you may be asking, why did you take this and put this out here in a Q&A? It seems to be a rather simple question. And it is. But I wanted to point out about the format for the shebang real quick. And that would be that what we're used to seeing, and I'll just open up Nano to play in here. What we're used to seeing for a shebang would be something like this, okay? Like I was talking about, we do £, and hold on, guys. There we go. For some reason I wasn't typing. Okay, we have that right there, and that would be the beginning of our bash script. And we should spell that correctly. And these days, in a lot of Linux distributions, there isn't a bin directory. The bin now is simply a link that goes to user/bin because they've dumped that for whatever reason. Not exactly sure what the... just simplification, I think, is the thought. So anyway, let me get out of here. No, I don't want to save this because now I want to do this. And I want to do... Can I just do this, please? Control X. No. Thank you. Let's do ls. And we'll do this. And you'll see here that the actual bin directory isn't a directory. I want an L. Do this 400 times a day, and when you do the video, you can't do it. Okay, look over here. You'll notice now that in recent versions of Ubuntu/Linux Mint, if we go and find the bin directory, it's not really a bin. See how it's now a link to user bin here? And it would make you wonder, well, why don't you write it to user bin? Because it would be portability. You can't do that. If you do, and you run it on an older system that somebody might be running where the bash is actually in a separate bin directory. Okay, I want to do this here, thank you. Then what will happen is that will not work. You'll also see some scripts where they use an env command, which is just an extra way of doing that, and then they will specify bash as being somewhere else. That fails too on occasion on certain systems. So for absolute portability, boys and girls, do the old shebang, the one that's just hashtag exclamation point bin bash. That took a while to get there, didn't you? We have a term for that. That's called going around your... Oh, never mind. Last question. I did a video earlier all about SSDs and using them in cheap SSDs in old machines to give them new life. And one of the things that I had mentioned was that you're not supposed to fragment SSDs. And this fellow, who I will not... I'm not going to try and say that. Or lady. I don't know which. It says about fragmentation, 2 types of fragmentation happen. Regular is file system level and low level on hardware. Defragment for SSD is recommended, but do it rarely. More important is not using the SSD to full capacity. After 90% full, very bad things start to happen. That is true. You do not want to fill up your SSDs. However, somebody had said, well, that you're not supposed to defragment, and then this guy went into deeper detail and explained in the comment, which got me wondering whether it's even possible to defragment in my system here. So let's see what happens if I try and defragment my SSD, because now if I use SSH and log into a machine, I have been able to get the defragmenter to run on a machine that was with an SSD. But I'm going to try it on my local machine here. And so what we're going to do is, let's do E4 defrag. And I'm going to run this. I got to run this as root, or it might get mad. So just to make sure, we'll super user do or substitute user do, however you want to define that, sudo or sudo. And then we are going to just go ahead and try and run it on my home directory, which is probably the only thing that would need defragmented, because I just recently reloaded this machine not too long ago. Let's see what it does. It's doing it. We are now defragmenting my SSD. Okay, there was a time when it wouldn't allow you to do that directly. Apparently that has changed. So, I'm going to let it finish. Probably screwing up my SSD, but I've had that particular SSD has had that home directory on it with no messing around with it for 3 years. So it probably would come back and say that it's not fragmented at all because the drive is less than a quarter full, but why not? It worked, right? We'll let it run. Finally, in this video, I want to talk about the Easy Linux web page a little bit. I'm not really sure how long this is going to be around, boys and girls. I made the decision a little while back to take the contact off of this page, and the reason why, for those of you who may have noticed that, is that the spammers have figured out how to get around the I am not a robots and all of that stuff, and my email box that's connected to this page has started to fill up with junk. And every once in a great while I will get an email from a visitor to this page, but it got to the point where most of it was spam and all I was doing was deleting stuff all the time. So I've decided to switch that off. The main reason that I keep this page up and running is because there's a lot of references to it in past videos, and I talk a lot about the bash scripts page, which is really one of the only functioning parts of the page these days, where you can find links to videos about programs that I've written, plus there is links to the GitHub page where all of this stuff lives. So that's one of the reasons that I have kept the page around. And the other is that I have been informed by certain viewers over the years that instead of being subscribed, that they come here to where I have posts and they are looking to see that I have a new video. And if I post here that I have a new Linux related video, they will watch it. So I do, every time that I post a video related to Linux of any significance, I will post it here. So that's really the only reason it exists. A lot of the verbiage on this page, goes back to the days when I was doing one-on-one support with people and helping people install Linux, and I really haven't done a great deal of trying to clean that up, and I'm not really sure I want to. I just don't really see this page as having a great deal of relevance in 2023. Way back in 2015, people were way more apt to read articles. They were more apt to interact in forums. At one point in time, I had a forum hooked up to this page called Easy Talk, and that kind of went away from lack of interest. People weren't interested in it. They just weren't involved with it at all, so I got rid of it. And so now I'm wondering if I want to continue to just keep the page up and running at all. Not really sure. We'll see. In April, I'll have to pay to renew everything, and we'll see. I'll make a final decision then, and then it'll be up for at least another year. So your input on this would be great, because honestly, I can't think of much to do with it. Is this a big deal to you or not? That's going to be the question. If not, it may just go away, because people interact with the internet very differently than they did when I started the Easy Linux project several years ago. So things have changed quite a bit. And so that is one announcement that I wanted to make. The next announcement will be the next video is probably going to be audio related. And I had mentioned earlier, I believe, that I wanted to do an audio-only Q&A. If that is something that you're interested in, please let me know. And if you have a question, go ahead and put it in here if it's an audio-related question, and I will start gathering those up to do an audio-only Q&A probably 2 or 3 weeks from now. We'll see. If you have any questions, throw them in there. I would love to talk to you about that. The videos about audio do not get as many views as the Linux-related videos, but you guys are a very vocal audience, and thank you for doing that, because I post that because it's something that I'm passionate about, and I like to share that. So that's about it, boys and girls. Thank you for watching. The best thing that you can do for me, if you like what you see, is to share it and to get it out to more people, because YouTube does a crappy job of advertising it to people. Not only that, just because I have 125,000 subscribers does not mean that I get 125,000 views on anything. I'm not really sure how that works either. I thought that was the whole idea of having subscribers, is that, but it doesn't, whatever. So, I'm not begging you for money, and I'm not saying subscribe and like everybody else does. It gets so cheesy after a while, doesn't it? You haven't even seen the video yet. Be sure and subscribe and click that little... Shut up. Get to the point. Anyway, I don't do all that stuff, but I will ask you to share if you find a video useful, because that's going to be the best way to get the word out, get more subscribers, and get more people watching the videos. So we will do this again soon. Your comments and suggestions, love it. Talk to you later.